I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. Today we're talking about the popular daily word game Wordle with everything you need to know. But first, progressives in New York City. What does it mean to be a progressive in New York City? At its height, with the murder of George Floyd, police protests in the city council passed a budget that called for $1 billion in cuts to the NYPD. And leaders of the city council's progressive caucus established a statement of principles that includes universal early childhood education, affordable housing, and the reduction of the police department. That last point being the most controversial, since major crime rose by 22% last year. The division has led 15 members to quit the group. Joining us is Jeffery Mays, Metro reporter for the New York Times, covering City Hall with Emma Fitzsimmons, and has had a number of revealing stories lately about the Adams administration. Jeffrey, the mayor promised to get stuff done. Now he promises in his State of the City agenda to help working people. Has he gotten stuff done, and what kind of manager has he been in that first year?
Well, I think if you talk to the mayor and his State of the City, he felt that he had accomplished several goals. He's always led with crime and the reduction of crime, and certainly certain elements of crime were down last year. Homicides, shootings were down last year. So that has always been his sort of number one push. But at his State of the City, he announced a few initiatives that some people were excited about. There's going to be citywide composting. Again, that was cut, during the pandemic. And more importantly, he announced a plan to figure out what to do with a lot of the empty office buildings in places like Midtown, with remote work, with hybrid work. Spaces have not been filled. And the call has been to sort of turn those neighborhoods into 24-hour live-work neighborhoods. The mayor has produced a report with the governor. Although it was light on details about doing that, he re-emphasized that in his State of the City, and that he was supporting a rezoning of Midtown to sort of begin the process of figuring out how to turn those spaces into sort of 24-hour live work spaces.
He's also had to face challenges that he didn't expect when he was running, the influx of immigrants to the city, and also how to remove mentally ill people from the city streets, not voluntarily. How has he coped with those?
Yeah, certainly the mayor came in, the pandemic was still ongoing, and he's dealing with the effects of the pandemic still. He announced a proposal to sort of be able to take mentally ill people off of the street if they appear to not be able to care for themselves. That received a lot of pushback from advocates who were really concerned about people being abused, people's rights being violated as well. And so we haven't heard anything major about that proposal yet. Some of the people who have been removed, it hasn't been a huge number as of yet. So I think the jury is still out on that. Secondly, the mayor has been dealing with an influx of asylum seekers in the country. More than 40,000 people have come here since last year. Many of them have come from the southern border. Some of them were shipped here by, the governors of Texas and other states. But now there's a steady flow of asylum seekers to New York City. And the cost to house them has been really high. The mayor has given sort of varying cost estimates of costs, anywhere from $2 to $4 billion in terms of how much it will cost to house and feed many of these people who come here with nothing but the clothes on their backs and don't even have work authorization yet.
Jeffrey, as you've written, 15 of the 35 members of the Progressive Caucus and the council have quit, saying in effect that the litmus test for being a progressive has become too high. Does the mayor consider himself a progressive? The progressives apparently don't consider him a progressive. And has the test become too high, considering the Republican gains in the last election?
Well, that's the big question, right? Mayor Adams certainly considers himself a progressive. His definition is one who seeks progress. And on certain issues such as LGBTQ rights, women's right, reproductive health rights, he certainly considers himself a progressive. The problem is, what does being a progressive actually mean? That definition has shifted over the years so that someone who was once considered a progressive may not be considered a progressive. And one of the things the progressive movement in New York City has latched onto is reducing the police department $5 billion budget in such a way as that they could use that money to do other things that they think prevent crime. That has been a controversial issue for Democrats. It's been one that voters have weighed in on. Some are not happy about that language, the so-called defund the police language. But progressives, the Progressive Caucus felt that they really just had too many people who sort of talked the talk about being progressive and weren't able to walk the walk. So they put out the statement of principles. And one of the statements was doing everything in your power to reduce the NYPD and the correction department budget. Now, there are several members who are facing re-election. Actually, the whole council is facing re-election this coming year. Several people who have races where that will definitely be a liability. They left the caucus. The speaker's leadership team left the caucus. And almost all white people who were progressives on the city council have left the Progressive Caucus, except one. But caucus leaders feel like this sort of refining of their mission and ideology will help them take on the mayor, who has really been a vocal critic of the left, and accused them of costing the Democratic Party control of Congress, for example.
Have any of these people suggested spending more or spending as much on the police budget, giving the police better training?
Better training is an issue that has been talked about for many years. I think if you talk to people in the progressive movement, their argument is that there are certain things that you just can't train away, and that there is a systemic issue with policing in this country. And certainly we've seen that with the murder of George Floyd, Tyree Nichols, the situation in Memphis as well. So we've seen these horrible instances of police abuse. The argument is that in order to sort of prevent crime and some of the issues that we're facing, that the money that's spent on policing can be better spent on schools, on affordable housing, on healthcare. And that's been the argument, and that the police budgets are too large. Now, there is strong disagreement on that, especially from the moderate wing of the Democratic Party. President Biden, down to Governor Hochul and Eric Adams, will disabuse people of that notion that police spending needs to stop. And in fact, they would argue that, spending needs to be increased to help address crime. So that's really the crux of the battle right there between progressives and the sort of more moderate wing of the Democratic Party.
Jeffrey, we talk about moderates and progressives in the Democratic Party. Are there any liberals left in the Democratic Party?
Well, how do you define liberal?
That's a good question. What's the difference between a liberal and a progressive?
I'm not sure what the huge difference is right now. I know progressives right now are focusing, at least on the city council, they focus on a few things: affordable housing, universal child care, and then, of course, most controversially, reducing the police and corrections department budget. That has just been a sort of national issue that Democrats have struggled with on how to deal with the problems that we obviously have with policing, given some of the incidents that we've seen. And also, the concerns about, do we have enough money? Are we putting enough money into things such as schools and affordable housing? So it's a debate that is not solved at all. But I think what you will see on the city council is just a clearer definition of them, from them, of what being progressive means, which will allow them to be more forceful, I believe, and push back more strongly against the mayor.
You and Emma wrote a story recently on the mayor's mood, his anger at the press, and a sense among present and former Black officials that he is kind of being singled out for criticism because he is Black. Evoking memories of Mayor Dinkins, who received, to some extent, the same treatment. But when you look back at Abe Beame, who was looked upon as impotent in the face of the fiscal crisis, when you look at Mayor Giuliani, who was sort of seen in some cases as a petty tyrant, when you look at Bill de Blasio, who was ridiculed for going to the gym all the time and eating pizza with a knife and fork, is Mayor Adams being treated differently in that sense?
Well, look, it's an interesting argument. New York City considers itself a sort of progressive place. Yet we've only had Eric Adams is only the second black mayor. David Dinkins was the first black mayor, and we didn't have another black mayor for 30 plus years. So the argument is about how David Dinkins was treated. He was a one-term mayor. He faced some criticism over how he handled certain crises in the city, how he handled crime. There was a lot of talk about David Dinkins as being this sort of aristocratic mayor. He liked to go to the balls and the events, and he owned multiple tuxedos, for example. Eric Adams feels like that sort of talk is sort of coded racial language and criticism that he, as a black man, faces that a white mayor would not face. And I think the concern is, especially the moment we're in and dealing with crime, is that he will be scapegoated if crime is not addressed, or reduced in a significant way. I think the argument from the mayor is he wants to be treated fairly. And a lot of people agree with him that there is definitely a racial element in how people are perceived, how their competence is calculated by the public.
You wrote also about the 4 black mayors of major cities in the country wanting to explain how they view the mayoralty differently, how they came from different backgrounds. Did they govern differently from white mayors would?
I don't think they govern differently. I think what it is that there's a certain consideration given their lived experience as African Americans in this country that, the mayor has certainly made the argument that he understands certain New Yorkers better than another mayor would. So, for example, the mayor often talks about the fact that his family was nearly homeless at one point. He says he was beaten by police. And had some involvement in the criminal justice system as a young man. He was dyslexic, so he felt that the school system did not serve him well. A lot of these are issues that millions of New Yorkers are dealing with right now in terms of the school system, interactions with police, poverty, not having enough money. So the mayor feels like he has a perspective on those issues because he actually lived them. A lot of people that he hired also have similar situations. His immigrant affairs deputy mayor crossed the border as a young person. His recently departed social services commissioner also had a history as a young man dealing with the social services. So the mayor really values this idea that his lived experience gives him a sort of better look at the issues and a better knowledge to address some of the deep and longstanding problems facing the city.
It certainly helps with a more realistic perspective. Jeffrey Mays, City Hall reporter for the New York Times, thank you for joining us. Up next, it's all about Wordle. It's the New York Times game that's been played more than 2 billion times in 2022, a real love story. And unless you were living in a cave or under a rock, you've no doubt heard of the word Wordle. How does Wordle work? The player gets 6 chances to guess a 5-letter word, and only one puzzle is released each day. The colors are green, indicating the right letter that's in the right spot, yellow indicating the right letter is in the wrong spot, and gray if the letter is not in the word. The popular puzzle was created by Josh Wardle, and in January of 2022, it was acquired by the New York Times. Last November, Tracy Bennett was named the Wordle Editor for the New York Times, and she joins us today. Tracy, was Wordle really created by someone named Wardle, and was it a labor of love?
Yes, both of those things. Josh Wardle created the game and presented it just to his partner, Palak Shah, who helped create the word list that would run through 2027. And at the beginning, it was just the two of them playing, and then they introduced it to their families, and then to the world.
You said you started playing jigsaw puzzles when you were 17 months old, not just playing them, but got good at them. But did you grow up always wanting to be a Wordle editor?
No, I mean, I had lots of dreams when I was young, but I did always love puzzles and always loved word games. That was a big part of my life always. And I started solving the New York Times crossword puzzle, the Sunday puzzle, when I was 17, and just basically stuck with it my whole life.
How do you edit Wordle?
How do you edit Wordle? So I basically I set up words for a week at a time, and I look at each word, I research the word in dictionaries, and I Google each word to make sure it's appropriate. I see how solvable it is, and that sort of thing. So I study each word.
You said that the game will now, since it was acquired by the Times, have a Times curated word list to be programmed, tested, like spelling bee, like the crossword, to make sure the game stays focused on vocabulary that's fun, accessible, lively, and varied. How do we meet those criteria?
Well, first of all, you want to look at secondary meanings of words to make sure there's nothing offensive or derogatory as a secondary meaning, because there's so many words to choose from. You don't really need to choose words that are like that. You know, obscurity is also an issue. So if a word really isn't used in everyday parlance, then people will have a hard time solving for it. So you do generally want people to be able to solve within 6 guesses.
I find that in spelling bee, there are some words that seem almost made up. I probably shouldn't say this, but in Wordle, are these all real words, words that one would use normally?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, a literate person who reads, should be able to know most of the words that appear. Yes.
What are the biggest complaints from readers who are doing Wordle about clues or words that they just couldn't wrestle with?
Well, yesterday we had a comparative word. It was riper. And there aren't a lot of comparative words in the word list. There are about 12. We've run 5. A lot of people had a trouble with that word yesterday. It broke a lot of streaks.
And what are some of the best clues that people have been given to get that magic word?
Well, there's a strategy that many people use is to figure out which vowels are in the word within the first 2 guesses. So they might start with 2 words that have all the vowels, like audio, and then another one that has Y, for example, so that they can figure out, at least they have that starting point.
If someone said to you, hey, you edit this puzzle, tell me what's the best way to play it, what's the secret behind it, what would you tell them?
Well, I would say that one strategy is probably a good strategy. Also, to try to get, the Wheel of Fortune letters, RSTLNE, to get those kind of figured out in the beginning too. So you can narrow down your options really quickly and figure out which letters are and are not in the word before the 6th guess.
What does the what does the Wordle Bot do?
Well, Wordle Bot is taking statistics of people who are subscribers to the Times who play the game. And they're showing those people how they scored in relative to others who were playing the game that are subscribers. It measures subscriber data.
And is the game based on luck or is it based on deduction? How does it compare to other word games?
Mostly it's deduction. I mean, it's a strategy game, but there is a luck factor, an uncertainty factor sometimes. For example, a word like sound, which ran on Valentine's Day, when you had O-U-N-D in place, there were still 8 possibilities for that first letter. And so you might be unlucky and not guess, it's bound, found, round, mound. You might not get to sound before you ran out of guesses. So that kind of answer is based on luck.
In editing so far, have you had a favorite word?
I liked blurb.
Which word?
I like words that sound funny, sound interesting and crunchy.
And what kind of reader reaction have you gotten? Has anything surprised you?
I have gotten, a little bit of blowback on various choices that I've made, but I've also gotten poetry. There's someone named Rowan Waller who writes a poem every day and posts it on Twitter. Poetry based on that day's Wordle word. And I've gotten a short story where all the 5-letter words were all from the previous months of Wordle. And I also got a song. Someone wrote a song and sent it to me. It had 5 verses.
People get very creative, don't they?
Yes.
Now,
Yes, I would love there to be a forum where some of this stuff can be displayed.
how did you become
Shared.
Wordle editor?
Well, I was in the right place at the right time. So I've been working at the Times for a couple of years since 2020. And when I was hired, I was told I might get a game at some point. There were always games being developed by our brilliant games team at the Times. And it just so happened that the next game that became available was Wordle. And much to my surprise, they entrusted me with that. And I just run with it ever since. There are only 5 of us on the team, so it was a limited number of choices for people to take on the game.
What's the goal of the game, would you say, for the average player? I mean, it's obviously to make you think and occupy you and, refine your mind and keep it sharp. Well, how would you describe it?
If you're a person who loves words and loves language, but doesn't have time or energy to tackle a full crossword puzzle, or even the spelling bee, which can take a little bit longer to get good at, I think it's a perfect game for someone who wants to touch base with words that they enjoy and love every day, and also share. And I think the shareability factor makes it really exciting and fun and communal.
You said that before you were a Times puzzle editor, you were a mathematical copy editor in Ann Arbor. This sounds like a lot more fun, doesn't it?
It is. It's a lot more fun, but I always loved that work too. I love working with words, and I got to learn a lot about coding and mathematical symbolism. And math is a language. So, and to that extent, I really loved working with it.
How did you get involved in that?
I just was kind of restless after I graduated from college. I didn't want to go on and get a PhD. I really wanted to be in the working world, and I wanted to be in publishing. And Math Reviews just happened to be hiring at that time. And I quickly took to it. I just really loved, at that time we were working all with pencils, blue and red pencils. So I really loved marking up all the mistakes.
And do you play other word games too?
I play spelling bee every day, and I do a lot of crossword puzzles. And of course I play Boggle and Scrabble and Giotto, which is kind of an old version of Wordle, actually.
Anything we should know about future Wordle clues, games, words?
No, just that the words that we have now, I might add to them. I'm always finding a few words here and there that are surprisingly not on the list, and so I'm probably going to add a few. And then maybe possibly before we run out of words in 2027, we'll re-add the words and change the rules for.
Okay, we have a lot of time to play until then. Thanks for joining us, Tracy Bennett, the Wordle editor of the New York Times. Coming up next, my thoughts on New York City's $100 billion budget. New York City's budget is about $101 billion. Where do the dollars go? You'd probably be surprised. About 30 cents of every dollar pays for education, 20 cents for public assistance and other social services. Another 20 cents is diverted to pensions and fringe benefits for former and present city employees. Police protection, firefighting, and the system of jails and other forms of detention, I refuse to call it corrections, wind up with less than a dime. That's the same amount that's allocated to health, environmental protection, and sanitation. And the category euphemized as debt service, the interest we pay for borrowing, in part when we spend faster than revenue flows in, eats up 6 cents of every budget dollar. The city's independent budget office recently tiptoed with about a dozen new suggestions for paring expenses and raising revenue. ending rental assistance for charter schools would save $75 million. Hiring more tax auditors would generate $175 million. But if the city imposed all those new budget options, the budget would be just half a cent less out of every dollar. Little things do add up, but there's often little appetite for those options, much less some of the budget office's other big-ticket alternatives. Some may be far-fetched, like charging to pick up your non-recycled garbage, which would produce about $400 million. But what's wrong with increasing penalties for failing to repair faulty building facades? That would produce about $150 million. Fees to operate the outdoor dining that proliferated since COVID would add $170 million more. These numbers may sound enormous, and they are, but they hint at how little leeway city officials have in balancing the budget that totals more than $100 billion. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.